Hello model railroaders, welcome back to the layout. Bit of an update, and I'm hoping to stitch together a few different bits in this video so that you can see some progress happening. Now you're seeing the painted risers for the logging run in place and a little bit of trackling on it, but the track is not secured to the risers yet. There were a couple of hiccups that I had to find a solution for before I can perform that. So I did acquire one of the items that I needed, which is a 12-inch long 3/16 wide bit. So I needed that to actually drill a hole through the risers, which the tallest is 6 inches, down so that I could run the track feeder wires down to the layout. Now, the second issue is, how am I going to connect these feeder wires to the bits of track and still, which will be secured in the non-removable joints, so to speak, where the joints do butt up against each other, there will be a piece of removable track there. But once that track is removed, how am I going to then be able to remove the riser and disconnect the power from the bus lines that are below the plywood of the benchtop surface? So there were a couple of thoughts that I had, but I think using the magnets that I mentioned in an earlier video that were for use with earrings, they were bought from a hobby store. I'll call it a hobby store. It's more of a yarn and craft store, but I'll give it a wider range and call it a hobby store. Not too far away, that I purchased years ago. Well, I did check the continuity on those magnets, and they are passing current through them, so from one end to the other, which I'll show you in a video I'll stitch in. So that was the solution, because I'm just going to pan you around here. The initial thought was like I was using for the switch panels, was using the quick connects, which are of course the male and female, and there's the bullet style or the slot style connectors. But detaching them from the risers, you'd have to lay the riser on its side for you to be able to get in there and grab both end, each connector and pull it apart, which would be very difficult and potentially damage any scenery performed on the riser. So that's when I checked the magnets for continuity, and it worked. So what I'm going to end up doing, and that's what I'll stitch in the clips as this video progresses, is drilling a hole through the riser, and then I'm going to take a router in one instance, or the hot knife, and hollow out a section at the bottom of the riser, and then mark where that section is, run my leads down from my track to that cavity that I would have then created, drill a couple holes in the plywood that would be within that cavity zone as well, and then set the magnets in and use some of the shrink tubing to isolate one magnet lead from the other. So that is the plan I'm going to do and try and film, so that you've got an actual, well, not real time, but you've actually seen me perform the task and get it put into practice and the track into place. So that is my goal. Just to give you a view, the painted backdrop or scene break has been installed, so it's now solid, and I can get trains down the other line, and then of course the rail running all the way down the back to this location. So once I get the track down to this point, then as I mentioned in a previous video, all of this has to be relocated so that I can figure out where the yard's going to be, with the yard on top of the half-inch foam, and then how that's going to tie in to the track here. And then what I'm going to end up doing, I've got to sort that out with the track. I've gone through and looked at some of the various industrial siding plans that I could find, and that will be the follow-on step, is figuring out what I'm going to do as far as industry down this section, and where the track, well, I know for the curve I've got to go from this location to be able to get my curve around to this side. So that's a given that I have to do that. But from this point down, and am I going to put anything in this area, that all has to be decided. So that's kind of a roadmap of what I want to accomplish as the next few videos that I produce and upload to the web page, YouTube page, whatever it's called. That's what I want to do. So I'm going to end this particular segment, and I will join you back momentarily, showing you in regards to doing the hole for the leads in this section here, and then hollowing out the cavity in the riser, and such and so forth to get this project moving. So see you in a moment. Okay, before we dig on further, I just wanted to show again, these are the little magnets that are actually, I guess, predominantly used for earrings, so that you could attach one end to an earring stud and the other end to an earring, and then you could do multiples of different earrings where you could attach them to the same magnetic stud. I believe that's the intent. So what we've got are two very small halves, but they are opposite poles, so they do lock together very good. And then they've got a little loop, if it can come through well on video, a little loop on each side that I would be able to hook the wires to. So what I'm going to do is, I've got my multimeter set for continuity, so you'll hear the tone, and then when separated, no tone. So and they of course lock back into place very readily. So that is what I'm going to use to make a very easily removable foam section, so that the track leads can be broken without having to use those manual connectors that you'd have to struggle to pull apart. And I'll just use some heat shrink tubing, and we'll get into that as we progress. So just to give you more information, that's what I was referring to. And while I see it in front of me, when you've got extra paint left over and you don't want the can rusting or the lid rusting on you, grab a mason jar. If they can hold preservatives, they can hold paint. And it makes it a whole lot easier to keep your paint from getting funky. And it's very easy to shake to mix the paint up, because you can really grab hold of it and give it a good shake, and you don't have to worry too much about having to scrape the paint up from the bottom of the pail, or all the pails are plastic, but the lids aren't. So I noticed I was seeing a little bit of rust on this lid when I was painting the backdrops, and transferred everything into a mason jar. So just a secondary quick tip, because paint's expensive and you want to make it last as long as you possibly can. So smaller quantities, lower sized mason jars, less air headspace in them, and once you're done, since it's water soluble, you just rinse the jar out of paint and reuse the jar for another color. So secondary quick tip as a that you will hopefully find useful. So on to our production of getting these lead wires all set in the foam. Back in a moment. So I've pulled this foam section off the layout. This will lead into the trestle bridge on this side. And when I had the track up there, I used a bit to mark the center between the rails. So, and pulled the 3/8 inch wide 12-inch long drill bit, so I've got lots of room to get through the 6-inch section. And even in the other sections within the logging run, if I need to, I can punch all the way down through the foam, through the plywood to run leads. So I figure I may as well get it the 12-inch. As always, I looked around, found out where it was on sale. Normally they're about somewhere around $18–19 Canadian, and I got it on sale for about $9. So I'm quite happy with that, because it's a tool that I'll have long term, and should be very useful in regards to punching holes through foam. I do know that Ken Patterson has shown on his videos where he will use a bit of tubing to cut through the foam to make a hole, and then he feeds his line down through the center of the tubing and then pulls the tubing out of the foam, leaving the lead wire behind. Well, it was going to cost me a whole lot more to get a piece of tubing in the diameter that I would want, just not freely accessible. So I went with the drill bit option instead. Now I could chuck this in the drill, or I can just do it by hand, because it is only foam, so of course it's going to easily bore through the foam. So we'll just get that going in the hole, and start rotating through it. Now I'm following down the side of one of my glue joints, so that is going to help guide me a little bit on keeping it straight, because it won't want to punch at an angle through that glue joint. So I believe I'm down at the end, so we'll just turn it, and there we go. So I'll try and get a bit of a, find it on the viewfinder and get it centered, since it's backward for me. So there we are. We've pushed through the glue, and that's a 3-inch, 3/16 of an inch, pardon me, section that will fit 2 of the feeder wires that I'm going to use to push through. So I'll cut to the next stitched in a bit of instruction. So we'll go ahead and we'll actually use the router. Now that we've got the hole, I'll mark out using a ruler the edges, and we'll go ahead and router out probably at least a 3/4 inch deep section in the foam, leaving foam on the sides. So we'll cut to that now. Okay, well, let's get this prepped. So what I've got is a black marker and one of my machinist squares. This width on this square is 1 inch. This, of course, is 2-inch thick foam, so I'm just going to eyeball the placement of the T-square and just mark down both sides. And that will essentially cover where I want to router out. Now, looking at it, because that's essentially between 2 sections, I'm going to mark both sections all the way and then go in 1 inch from each side to create the pocket. And that puts the area I want to remove predominantly centered where the leads are going to drop down, just to give me lots of room. So there is a more close-up view. So the hatch marked area, you can see the hole in the center. So that's what I'm going to use the router to pull out. Now I'm using the router in this case as an example, and I'm going to use a hot knife in one of the other sections as an example, just so that you can see the 2 different ways of creating that recessed cavity. Okay, so I'll be back in a moment with the router all prepared and ready to go and make lots of noise. Okay, so what I'm actually going to do before I start routering out the pocket, just to try and get a little cleaner edge, what I'm going to do is just use a steel ruler and an X-Acto knife just to rough cut the edge that I want to create the cavity sides from, just to give a little bit of a smoother, as the foam breaks away, that it won't fracture and look all funky on me. And I'm not being too exactly careful. You can see I just peeled up a little bit of foam. I don't know if this knife is getting a little dull, or it was just the angle I was taking at it that I wasn't really cutting well through the foam. But that's gotten through the glue on the joint. So I'll put that aside. And again, I'm just using regular tools that most of us probably have kicking around. This is just a Ryobi one, and I do believe this is a 1/2 inch bit. We're going to be making 1 inch hole, so you know it's smaller, so we got room to move it around. So bear with me while I make noise, and we'll quickly get this done. I've got it set to, grab a ruler. Right now I've got it set to just under 3/4 of an inch. These little magnets are about 1/2 inch. So I'll give it a try. If I need to go deeper, I'll adjust it and go deeper. But for right now, around 3/4 of an inch, I think will be good to try it. But it's more just so that you guys can see what I'm doing, and then I can make it deeper off screen, so to speak. So bear with me. Here we go. Okay, so, foam's very easy to get through. So there's our cavity and our hole in the middle. So on to the next bit of progress. Back with you in a moment.